The boardroom fell into a heavy silence as Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. She was mid-pitch for the product launch of her career, the one that would secure her promotion to VP. But as the phone buzzed again, her heart skipped. It wasn't just any text. It was from her best friend, Kate. "That billionaire Jared Weller just walked in. I'm dying. He's a total handsome, egotistical man." The words hit her like a jolt of electricity. Jared Weller. The name carried weight, authority, and a reputation for ruthless brilliance. As the founder and CEO of Weller Enterprises, he controlled a vast empire of tech innovations. But his looks were legendary too. Chiseled jaw, those cold blue eyes that could freeze anyone in their tracks. And yet, something about Jared Weller rubbed Emily the wrong way. The meeting continued, but Emily's mind couldn't focus. That text was a harmless joke, something to vent about, but now it felt like a spark had ignited something deeper in her. As the seconds ticked by, Jared Weller's presence was impossible to ignore. Every executive in the room knew that this meeting would change the trajectory of Merrick Innovations. And Emily, despite her preparation, felt the weight of his eyes on her, unwavering and unblinking. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Emily took a breath, trying to keep her composure. She was the head of product development at Merrick Innovations, and this presentation could make or break her chance at a VP position. She had worked tirelessly, pulled endless hours, all to get to this point. This was supposed to be her day, the moment she proved to everyone, especially to herself, that she deserved the promotion. But Jared Weller's presence threw everything off. His cold gaze felt like an unspoken challenge, one that cut through her confidence. She tried to focus on her slides, on her team's success, but it was impossible not to feel the intensity of his eyes on her every move. The man she had once jokingly called a handsome, egotistical man was now standing in the room, making her question everything. She couldn't help herself. In the middle of the pitch, she blurted out something that crossed the line. "You don't just buy success, Mr. Weller," she said, unable to hold back the frustration building inside her. "It's not about money or power. It's about making something that means something." The room went still, and Emily realized, too late, she had just challenged Jared Weller, who controlled more than a third of the global tech market, with a few reckless words. And just as the tension reached its peak, Jared stood up, his sharp gaze cutting through the room. Emily watched him step forward, his towering presence dominating the room, as he made an offer that would change everything. He had just seen enough in her to challenge her, to push her to her limits. "Prove it," he said. The words were simple, but they carried an undeniable weight. This wasn't just about the product launch. It was personal now. And the next few days would determine whether Emily would prove herself capable or fall victim to her own impulsive words. Jared's gaze was unwavering, his piercing blue eyes never leaving her as he stood in front of the room. The weight of his presence felt like a physical pressure, a tangible force that seemed to seep into her very thoughts. Emily could feel the sweat gathering at the back of her neck as she struggled to regain control over her thoughts. She had already crossed a line, challenged Jared's business practices publicly, and now she was paying the price. Her mind raced through the consequences. The promotion she'd worked for, the job she loved, the reputation she'd built, all of it was teetering on the edge. This was a pivotal moment. She had no idea what Jared would do next, but his silence was more terrifying than any harsh words. "You're confident, I'll give you that, Miss Carter." Jared's voice sliced through the tension like a knife. His tone was cool, almost clinical. "But the real question remains, does your idea have enough bite to stand up to the competition? Or will it be yet another attempt to innovate without real substance?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Emily's heart thudded in her chest. She knew she had the right solution. She'd spent months working on it. But here, in front of him, everything felt like it was falling apart. "Competition?" Emily repeated, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "Your firm thrives off buying out the competition, Jared. It's not just about having money or power. It's about making something that actually matters, not just buying your way to the top. The words left her lips before she could stop them, raw and unfiltered. A rush of satisfaction surged through her, but it was quickly replaced by the gnawing sense of regret. She'd let the anger get the better of her, and now there was no taking it back. The room fell dead silent, all eyes on her, some surprised, some waiting for the inevitable fallout. But Jared didn't flinch. He simply stood there, his sharp features unreadable. For a moment, Emily wondered if she'd just sealed her own fate. Then, without warning, he moved. Jared took a few steps toward her, closing the distance between them. His tall frame loomed over her, his presence almost suffocating. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to say something, to fix this. But the more he stood there, the more it became clear. This was no longer just a professional matter. Jared Weller was testing her, pushing her to the edge, to see if she would back down. "I think it's only fair that you're given a chance to prove yourself," he said, his voice calm and controlled, yet carrying an underlying edge. "You've made your point, Miss Carter, but actions speak louder than words." Emily opened her mouth to speak, but Jared cut her off, continuing without missing a beat. "If you can deliver the product launch for the upcoming quarter faster than anyone has ever expected, I'll personally fund your division," he said, his eyes gleaming with a challenge. "I'll even make sure you get the promotion you've been fighting for. But if you fail—" He paused, letting the weight of the words settle in. "Well, let's just say your career at this firm will be over. You'll be stuck in middle management forever." The shock hit her like a punch to the gut. She blinked, trying to process what he was offering, or threatening. A chance to prove herself, yes, but at what cost? Her career was on the line, her future. All of it hinged on this one impossible task, and she had no choice but to accept. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come out the way she expected. "I'll do it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll prove you wrong." Jared nodded, a slow, almost imperceptible smile curling at the corner of his lips. "I thought you might. You have fire, Miss Carter. Let's see if it's enough to ignite the change you're so sure of." As he turned to leave, Emily felt the gravity of the situation crash down on her. This wasn't just about completing a task. It was a battle for her future. She had taken the challenge, but now she realized she had to give everything she had to win. And there was no turning back. The days following Jared's challenge passed in a blur of pressure and unrelenting demands. Emily had always prided herself on her ability to manage, to juggle 100 tasks without breaking a sweat. But this was different. The stakes were higher, the clock ticking louder with each passing hour, and Jared's challenge loomed over her like an unshakable shadow. The task was impossible. Launch the product in record time, faster than any timeline the company had ever set. No one had ever dared to push the limits like this before, not even Jared, who had the power to make such outrageous demands. But there was no time for second-guessing. If she failed, her career would never recover. She sat at her desk, her computer screen glowing with spreadsheets, project timelines, and a dozen different charts. Emily scrolled through the numbers again, as though doing so might unlock a hidden solution. But all she saw was the same, an enormous, daunting task that felt like it would swallow her whole. There was no room for error. Not now. Not with Jared watching from the sidelines, his eyes always trained on her. The plan was simple. Break the task into manageable pieces, delegate, and execute with laser focus. Emily's first move was to rally her team, the one thing she could still control in this chaotic whirlwind. She called a meeting, bringing together her most trusted colleagues, the ones who had stuck by her through every product launch and late-night brainstorming session. "We don't have time for the usual prep work," Emily started, her voice clear but tight with tension. "We're going to have to rethink everything. Jared wants this faster than we've ever done it." I'm counting on you to push your limits, to innovate in ways we've never done before. If we're going to make this happen, we need to move fast. We need to be smarter." Her team listened, their faces a mix of determination and wariness. They knew how ambitious this would be, but they also knew how much Emily had invested in getting them to this point. No one questioned her leadership, at least, not yet. But as the days stretched on, Emily began to feel the weight of Jared's challenge bearing down on her. Every time she walked past his office, she felt the tension rise in her chest. He had become a constant presence in her life, watching from the sidelines, never lifting a finger, yet somehow always in control. She hated it. And yet, there was something about Jared she couldn't deny. His brilliance, his drive. His passion for his business was undeniable. It was the same drive that had built Weller Enterprises into the powerhouse it was today. He didn't take shortcuts. He didn't settle for mediocrity. He demanded the best, and sometimes that meant breaking the rules, bending the limits, and making impossible demands. As Emily worked late into the night, her thoughts often drifted to him. She couldn't help but notice the way he moved through the office, the way people seemed to fall silent when he entered a room. The power he wielded was intoxicating, but at the same time, it repelled her. She resented him, resented how easily he could manipulate people, how his presence could turn the whole room into his personal stage. "Jared Weller, the egotistical billionaire," she muttered under her breath one night as she stared at the task list on her screen. "He's nothing but a puppet master pulling all the strings." But despite the anger she felt, there was also a grudging respect. She couldn't deny that his intelligence was unmatched, that his vision for the future of technology was unlike anyone else's. And, if she were being honest with herself, a part of her admired him for it. That made her even angrier. The more Emily worked, the more her feelings became tangled. She had come into this project with one goal: to prove herself. To show Jared and everyone else that she wasn't just another woman trying to climb the corporate ladder. She was capable. She was intelligent. She belonged. But now, it wasn't just about the product launch anymore. It was about something deeper, something personal. It wasn't just Jared's challenge that was testing her now. It was her own growing feelings of uncertainty. She had never let herself be vulnerable before. Her ambition had always been her shield, her armor against the world. But now, as she worked tirelessly to meet the impossible deadline, she found herself questioning everything. Was she doing this for the promotion, or was she doing it to prove something to Jared? Was she really just trying to prove herself, or was there something more to this challenge, something that went beyond business? As if the pressure wasn't enough, Emily began facing resistance from her own colleagues. Whispers behind her back grew louder. People started questioning her decision to take on Jared's challenge, as if it was some kind of personal vendetta. "I don't think it's a good idea to risk it all on one bet," Rachel, one of Emily's closest colleagues, said during a team meeting. "What if you fail? You'll be stuck in the same position you've been trying to escape from for years." Emily clenched her jaw, trying to keep her composure. "I can't afford to back down now, Rachel. This is my chance. If I succeed, we all succeed." But the doubt lingered in the air like smoke. Her team wasn't the only place where resistance grew. At home, Emily struggled with the loneliness that came with her ambition. Her apartment felt emptier than usual, despite the work constantly piling up around her. She hadn't had time for herself in days, let alone for any social life. The weight of the challenge Jared had set before her felt suffocating. And though she had no one to talk to about it, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking a tightrope between success and failure, and there was no safety net below. Her phone buzzed one evening, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Kate. "Are you okay? You haven't seemed like yourself lately. I know this whole VP thing is big, but don't lose yourself in it. There's more to life than just this." She read the message, feeling a sharp pang in her chest. Kate was right. But how could she explain that this wasn't just about the promotion? It wasn't just about proving herself. It was about something deeper, something she couldn't name yet. But as the days blurred into nights, Emily knew one thing for sure. She was going to do whatever it took to prove herself. And maybe, just maybe, she would learn something about herself along the way. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back now. The clock on Emily's desk felt louder than ever. Tick, tick, tick. Each second was a reminder of how little time she had left. The timeline for the product launch had seemed nearly impossible when Jared first laid out the challenge, but now, with only 48 hours remaining, it felt like an insurmountable mountain. Every second that passed seemed to carry with it more pressure, more urgency. And yet, despite her best efforts, the team's progress had ground to a halt. Emily sat at the head of the table, surrounded by her team, each face reflecting the exhaustion that had begun to take its toll. The optimism that had fueled them at the start of this mad race had started to flicker, replaced by frustration and anxiety. She could see it in their eyes. They were burnt out. The deadlines were closing in, and every attempt to push forward seemed to meet an insurmountable obstacle. "We're behind schedule," Emily said, her voice strained. "We need to find a solution and fast. I don't care if we have to take some risks. This product has to be ready by the deadline. If we miss it, everything we've worked for will go to waste." Her words hung in the air, but there was no immediate response. The team shifted uncomfortably, reluctant to acknowledge the truth they were all trying to avoid. Emily knew the tension in the room wasn't just about the timeline. It was about her decision to accept Jared's challenge. Some of her colleagues were questioning her judgment, wondering if the promotion was worth the gamble. "Maybe we should scale back," Rachel suggested cautiously. "Push the launch to next quarter. It's not ideal, but at least we could deliver something that's properly developed." Emily's gaze hardened. "No," she replied firmly. "This is the last chance I have. I'm not giving up." Her words were cold, sharper than she intended, but she had no choice. She couldn't back down now, not after everything she had invested, not after the risk she had taken. The room fell silent again, and Emily knew that her colleagues were starting to doubt her ability to lead them through this. They weren't the only ones. The pressure was beginning to eat away at her, gnawing at her sense of self. Every decision she made seemed to alienate someone. Every step forward was met with resistance. She had pushed her team harder than she ever had before, demanding their best work. But now they were weary. She had to keep pushing them, but she wasn't sure how much longer they could hold on. At the same time, Jared's presence loomed over everything. He was always there, either through his cryptic emails or the occasional comment during team meetings, offering his thoughts in a way that both encouraged and unnerved her. His words were always calculated, pushing her to work harder, to be better, but at the same time, they left her feeling as though she was never enough. "You're still behind, Miss Carter," Jared had said in an email that morning. "Time waits for no one. Make sure you're moving fast enough to catch up." She had read the message with a mixture of resentment and gratitude. On one hand, his words pushed her to keep going, but on the other, they made her question whether she was truly capable of succeeding. Could she really meet his impossible expectations? Or was she simply chasing a dream that was bound to shatter? As the hours slipped away, Emily found herself at her desk long after everyone else had left. She stared at the spreadsheets and project timelines, her mind numb with exhaustion. Every plan seemed to fall short. Every idea felt incomplete. The door to her office creaked open, and Emily looked up to see Jared standing in the doorway. He had a commanding presence, as always, but this time his expression was different. There was no cold calculation in his gaze, no harsh judgment. Instead, there was something else, something unexpected. "I wanted to check in," he said, his voice calm. "I've been watching the progress. It's clear you're pushing yourself and your team to the limit." Emily narrowed her eyes, unsure of his intentions. And I think you're doing better than you realize," he said, taking a step inside. You've taken on an impossible task and have managed to make significant progress. I've been watching your strategy and it's impressive." The compliment caught her off guard. She hadn't expected anything like this, especially from someone like Jared. He was always so focused on results, never one to offer praise unless it was earned in a way that suited his purposes. "Thank you," she said, her voice tight, though she couldn't help the small flicker of appreciation that warmed her chest. "But there's still so much to be done. I'm not sure we can pull it off." Jared raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You're close. You've got more than just the ability to finish this. You've got the drive to do it under pressure. That's the mark of someone who can lead. It's why I made the challenge in the first place." His words sent a strange shiver down her spine. For a moment, the animosity between them seemed to dissipate, replaced by something far more complicated. She had always seen Jared as a ruthless businessman, a man who ruled with an iron fist. But now, in this fleeting moment, she began to wonder if there was more to him than his carefully constructed persona. But she couldn't afford to let her guard down. Not now, not when she was so close to losing everything. "I still have to prove myself," she said, shaking her head. "The deadline's too close. We don't have enough time." "You've got more than time. You've got skill. Trust your instincts, Emily. Don't second-guess yourself." For a moment, Emily felt the weight of the pressure lift slightly. Jared had just given her the kind of validation she hadn't expected from him. It wasn't much, but it was something. But as quickly as the moment of connection passed, reality crept back in. The team was still struggling. The deadline was still looming. And Jared's challenge still stood in the back of her mind like an insurmountable wall. "Thank you," she said again, this time softer. "I'll do everything I can." Jared nodded once, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he turned and walked out of the office without another word. As the door clicked shut behind him, Emily let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The weight of his challenge was still there, pressing down on her. But for the first time since it had all begun, she felt a spark of something different, something that wasn't just fear or resentment. Maybe she could do this after all. Maybe she could prove Jared wrong and show him that she was more than just a woman trying to climb the corporate ladder. She was a force to be reckoned with. And she wasn't about to back down now. The countdown had begun. With mere hours left before the presentation, Emily was trapped in a cycle of exhaustion and pressure that seemed to stretch beyond the limitations of time. The deadline was looming, the weight of it suffocating. There was no room for error. This was the moment. She had one last chance to prove herself, to make Jared's challenge worth it, to demonstrate that she was more than just capable, that she was a leader. She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the exhaustion. The room around her was a mess of empty coffee cups, crumpled notes, and half-finished project outlines. It was 2:00 a.m., and Emily had long since crossed the line between ambition and burnout. The team had been working tirelessly, but as the hours ticked away, she knew they were reaching their limit. She could feel the same tension that had been building all week, creeping into her own body, seizing her muscles, making her hands shake as she typed furiously at the keyboard. But she couldn't stop. Not now. There was a critical flaw in the product's integration, a bug that had refused to yield no matter how many times they tested it. The deadline was in less than 12 hours, and there was no guarantee that the issue could be fixed in time. Emily bit her lip, her mind racing through possible solutions. Every attempt to fix the bug had failed. It was as though the universe was conspiring to sabotage her. Every fix seemed to create more problems, each one more complex than the last. She could feel the panic rising in her chest, her thoughts becoming frantic. She needed to fix this, and fast. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to launch into another round of troubleshooting when her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at it absently, seeing the name she'd hoped not to see. Jared. "Are you still at the office, Miss Carter?" The message was short, but it hit her like a jolt of electricity. He knew she was working late, knew she was struggling. The weight of his challenge had been like a boulder pressing down on her chest for days, and now the moment of truth had arrived. She couldn't answer right away. What could she say? What words could explain the crushing reality of this situation? That she had worked her team to exhaustion, that every idea seemed to fall short, that she was moments away from failure? Just wrapping up, a couple of last-minute adjustments. Should be good for the presentation, she typed back quickly, trying to sound confident, even as doubt gnawed at her insides. Seconds passed before Jared's reply came through. I'll be there in 30 minutes. There's something you're missing. A cold shiver ran down her spine. He was coming to the office? What could he possibly offer at this stage? She had been so focused on the ticking clock that the idea of Jared showing up, of him watching her struggle, made her feel raw and vulnerable. But there was no time to analyze it. She needed a solution. 15 minutes later, she was still staring at the code, the problem unresolved, when the door to her office creaked open. Emily's heart skipped. Miss Carter. Jared's voice was calm, almost too calm. He stood in the doorway, dressed in a dark suit that looked like it had been tailored for him by a master. His eyes scanned the room, at the cluttered desk, the empty cups, the glow of her computer screen. His gaze softened for a brief moment as he crossed the threshold. You're still at it, I see, he said, walking towards her desk, his presence commanding the space. What's the issue? Emily stood up quickly, trying to shake off the haze of fatigue that had taken over her brain. There's a bug in the integration. Something's causing the product to crash when it's pushed to full capacity. I've tried everything, every fix I can think of, but nothing's working. Jared raised an eyebrow, his gaze never leaving hers. You've been at this for hours. You look like you haven't slept in days, but you're close. I can see that. Emily clenched her jaw, feeling a mix of frustration and helplessness. She hated that he could read her so easily. I've run every test I can. This thing is a nightmare, she replied, her voice tinged with exhaustion. I can't afford to fail. If I can't fix this, the launch will be delayed, and everything I've worked for will fall apart. Jared leaned against the desk, folding his arms across his chest. His eyes softened slightly as he studied her. There was no trace of the cold, calculating billionaire she had expected. Instead, there was something else, something more human. Tell me what you've tried, he said, his tone now oddly reassuring. I'm not here to solve this for you, Emily, but maybe I can help you see what you're missing. The offer wasn't what she expected. She thought Jared would throw out a snarky remark, maybe berate her for not being able to fix the problem on her own. Instead, he seemed oddly supportive, as if he believed in her abilities even when she didn't. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or insulted. She wasn't used to Jared's kind of help, silent and watchful, waiting for her to figure it out herself. She exhaled, her shoulders sagging. I've checked the code for the most obvious issues. The integration should be seamless, but I think the server capacity is overloading. It's creating a conflict in the system, but nothing seems to solve it. Jared moved to the desk, his eyes scanning the screen. You're looking for a single solution. But the real answer is about balance. You need to redistribute the load across more servers. You're focusing on the wrong problem. Emily's brow furrowed as she stared at the screen. His suggestion was simple. Too simple. But then again, that's what Jared was good at, wasn't it? Breaking down complex problems into manageable pieces. Balance, she repeated, the realization dawning on her. She was so caught up in the pressure of meeting the deadline that she had overlooked the most fundamental solution. Of course, I need to adjust the load distribution. Jared nodded, his expression serious. You've got the ability to fix this, Emily. You've been pushing yourself and everyone else because you want to prove something. But remember, there's a reason why you were chosen for this project. Don't lose sight of that. The words hit harder than expected. Emily had always been the one who pushed the hardest, who worked the longest hours. But deep down, she knew that she was trying to prove herself to Jared more than anyone else. His approval had become more important than she cared to admit. She stared at the screen again, her mind suddenly clear. "I can fix this," she said, more to herself than to Jared. "Good," he said simply, walking toward the door. "I'll check back in an hour. Don't overthink it." With that, Jared left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Emily sat back in her chair, her heart racing. She had less than an hour before the presentation, and less than 2 to fix the issue. But now, she had clarity. She wasn't alone in this fight, even if it felt that way sometimes. Emily turned back to her computer, her hands moving swiftly over the keyboard as she began to implement the solution Jared had suggested. She still had a mountain to climb, but for the first time in days, she felt like she could actually make it to the top. The final push had begun. The conference room was a sea of nervous glances as Emily stood at the head of the table, her laptop open and ready. She had spent the past 48 hours perfecting her presentation, burning the midnight oil in the face of a seemingly insurmountable challenge. Now, with the weight of her career and Jared's challenge on her shoulders, the time had finally come to show everyone, and herself, that she was capable of delivering under pressure. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she clicked through to the first slide. The room grew still, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound, as all eyes turned to her. The senior executives, the product team, and of course Jared, who stood at the back, his piercing blue eyes trained on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. She'd been working for months to get to this moment, but now, standing in front of them all, it felt like everything had led to this one presentation. "Good morning, everyone," Emily began, her voice steady despite the racing thoughts in her head. "Today, I'm presenting the solution to the product integration issue that has delayed our timeline. Thanks to some strategic adjustments to our server load distribution, we were able to expedite the process and deliver a functional product ready for launch by the agreed deadline." She clicked to the next slide, showing the flowchart of the system architecture she and her team had redesigned. The lines were clean, the logic tight. Each decision made was backed by data and years of expertise. She could feel her confidence building with every word. Emily moved through the presentation, carefully explaining the problem, the steps they had taken, and how the final result would not only meet, but exceed expectations. The team had worked tirelessly under her leadership, and she was proud of their collective effort. Her heart began to slow, the tension in her chest easing as she saw approving nods from the executives. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect. But as the last slide came into view, Emily noticed the shift in the room. She looked up to see Jared standing, his tall figure filling the space behind the table. The room was quiet. His eyes locked on hers, and she felt a jolt of anxiety run through her. "It's been a long road, Miss Carter." Jared's voice broke through the silence, smooth and controlled. "But I'm still not convinced. You've fixed the immediate issue, yes, but I wonder if you've really addressed the root cause of the problem. Your solution, while effective, relies heavily on a patchwork approach. What happens if this workaround fails when the product scales?" Emily's stomach dropped. The challenge had been to prove her ability, and now Jared was questioning the very foundation of her work. She had anticipated pushback, but this was different. This wasn't a simple critique. It was a direct challenge to her credibility. She took a deep breath, fighting to keep her composure. "I disagree," she said, her voice firmer now. "The solution is scalable and sustainable. We've tested it under various conditions, and the performance has remained consistent. This wasn't a temporary fix. It's a permanent adjustment that ensures the product's stability." Jared narrowed his eyes, his lips twisting slightly in that enigmatic way he had. "Really? You're sure? Because from where I'm standing, this solution lacks the resilience I'd expect from someone who wants to lead this division." The words hit harder than they should have. She felt a flash of irritation, her earlier calm slipping away. He had pushed her to the edge with that one. There was a difference between constructive criticism and undermining her expertise. She had been the one leading this project, and she was damn proud of the work her team had done. "I'm not here to waste your time, Jared," she said, her voice tight but controlled. "If you think my solution is insufficient, then I'd like to hear your suggestions. But I've already thought through the potential risks and built contingencies for each one." Jared stood still for a moment, watching her. The room was so quiet that even the sound of his breathing seemed loud in the space between them. Emily could feel the weight of his gaze, as though he was measuring her every word, every reaction. "I think we've heard enough," he finally said, his voice low but resolute. "You've done well, Miss Carter. I'll admit, I didn't expect you to come through under such pressure, but you've proven me wrong." Relief flooded Emily's chest as she looked around the room. The executives were nodding, some even offering small smiles, but Jared's words didn't reassure her completely. She had heard him compliment her, but it didn't feel like a victory yet. Not until he made the final call. He turned to the group, his voice commanding as he addressed the room. "This project is on track. You've earned your place here, Emily, and I'm convinced your solution is exactly what we need. I'll be following through on my promise. Your division will receive the funding it needs, and you'll be promoted to vice president. Consider this the first step in a long partnership with Weller Enterprises." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had done it. She had won. But even as the words settled into her mind, a part of her hesitated. Was this truly the end? Or just the beginning of something even more complicated? Before she could process everything, Jared stepped forward, his eyes lingering on her as he offered a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, his voice softer than she expected. "You've shown real determination, and you've earned my respect." Emily blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. She had been preparing for a victory speech of sorts, but this felt different. There was something more in the way he spoke to her, something that hadn't been there before. She swallowed, trying to find the right words. "Thank you, Jared. I couldn't have done it without my team. They've worked just as hard, and they deserve just as much credit." Jared gave a nod of acknowledgement, then, as if the moment had passed, he straightened. "Don't forget, this is just the beginning. We've got more work to do, Emily. I'm counting on you." His words hung in the air as the meeting concluded. But as everyone stood to leave, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She had won the battle, but what about the war? As she packed up her things, ready to leave the room, Jared approached her. She glanced at him, a mix of emotions welling up inside her. "Before you go, Miss Carter," he said, his voice lowering. "You did well today. But remember, I don't make offers like this to just anyone. You're more than capable of leading this company, but there's something else you need to understand. I'm not just offering you a promotion. I'm offering you a partnership. But whether you want it, that's up to you." The unexpected words hit her like a punch to the gut. He was offering more than just business. There was something more personal lurking behind those words, something she wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. But as she looked into his eyes, she realized that whatever this was between them, it wasn't going away. The question now was whether she could navigate it without losing everything else she'd worked so hard for. Her heart raced, the weight of the moment heavy on her shoulders. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. Jared nodded, as though he knew exactly what she was thinking. "Take your time," he said, his gaze lingering a moment longer before he turned and walked away. Emily stood there, her mind spinning. The lines between professional and personal had blurred, and now she had to figure out where to draw them, before it was too late. The moment Emily walked into her new office, she couldn't believe it. The polished floors, the sleek glass desk, the panoramic view of the city. It all felt like a dream. She had worked for years to get here, and now, standing in the middle of this space, she finally felt like she was where she belonged. Her promotion to Vice President of Product Development had been swift, and the success of the product launch had solidified her position in ways she never thought possible. Jared's company, Weller Enterprises, had not only backed her division financially, but had also made a public commitment to supporting the long-term growth of her department. She stood by the window, looking out at the city below. The skyline stretched beyond her sight, the sun casting a golden hue on everything in its path. It was a perfect moment, but the weight of everything that had happened still clung to her like an invisible fog. "Miss Carter?" a voice called from behind her, pulling her from her reverie. She turned to see Rachel, one of her new team members, standing in the doorway, her face lit up with excitement. "Congratulations, Emily, this is huge. You did it." Emily smiled, trying to shake off the tension in her shoulders. "Thanks, Rachel. It's been a long road, but I couldn't have done it without everyone's help." As Rachel left to join the others in the celebratory lunch they'd planned, Emily sat down at her new desk. She glanced at the stack of congratulatory messages that had flooded in from colleagues and industry contacts, many of them accompanied by words of praise for her leadership and vision. Her team had rallied around her, worked harder than they ever had before, and in the end, the launch had been a resounding success. Yet even with all of the outward triumph, there was something else gnawing at her. The reality of Jared's involvement in her success was still fresh, and it was something she couldn't quite shake. She had proven herself to him, but now that the professional facade had been removed, she was left with the question of what came next. She had worked so hard to get here, and now everything felt tangled. Her career had soared, but what about her personal life? The line between them had blurred, and as much as she tried to push those thoughts to the back of her mind, Jared lingered in her consciousness like an unsolvable puzzle. Jared hadn't made things easier. He had stayed professional, maintaining a clear distance, but there were moments, subtle moments, when his gaze lingered just a little longer than it should have, or when his words carried more weight than they seemed to at first. Those moments were becoming harder to ignore. The first time she had caught him staring at her after the launch, she'd brushed it off. It was nothing. Business. But as time passed, she found herself second-guessing her thoughts, questioning his intentions. Jared's support, his quiet encouragement, had slowly evolved into something more. And Emily knew she wasn't the only one who had noticed it. She couldn't deny the fact that Jared had made her feel things she had no business feeling. He was the kind of man who commanded attention, who made everything seem like a game of strategy. And for the first time, Emily wasn't sure if she wanted to play by the rules anymore. But that was the problem. She knew Jared Weller. She knew what he was capable of. He didn't get to the top by playing nice or letting anyone off the hook. Everything with him was a transaction, a calculated move in a game of high stakes. He was a billionaire. He didn't have time for distractions. Yet despite all of that, the more Emily worked with him, the more she found herself drawn to him. His intellect, his ambition, the way he carried himself with quiet authority. It wasn't just about the attraction anymore. It was the power dynamic between them, the tension that lingered when they were in the same room. And it was inescapable. As the days passed, Emily settled into her new role, but the internal conflict remained. She pushed herself harder than ever before, diving into new projects, focusing on her team, and handling the weight of her new responsibilities. But there was always something on the periphery, something she couldn't quite grasp, something that made her look over her shoulder at Jared more often than she cared to admit. One afternoon, as she worked late in her office, the door to her office opened without a knock. Jared walked in, as composed and unbothered as ever. Emily glanced up, her pulse kicking up for reasons she couldn't explain. "Emily," he said, his voice steady, "you've done well. The team is in good hands. Your leadership has been impressive, and I've been keeping an eye on your progress." She nodded, her hands lingering on the files in front of her. She didn't look up at him, afraid that if she did, he'd see through her defenses. "Thanks, Jared. That means a lot." Jared walked to the side of her desk, standing next to her. She felt the heat of his presence, his towering figure casting a shadow over her as he looked down at the papers in front of her. "I wasn't expecting you to handle the pressure so well," he said quietly, his voice almost gentle. "But you did. And now, you've earned my respect." Emily's heart skipped, but she quickly masked it with a sharp, professional smile. "I'm just doing my job, Jared. The real work starts now." Jared leaned in a little closer, his gaze flickering between her and the documents on her desk. There was something in the way he studied her, something that made her feel exposed, vulnerable, like he saw right through her carefully constructed walls. "There's more than just your job, Emily," he said softly, his words lingering in the air between them. Her breath caught. She could feel the electricity between them, thick and palpable. She didn't look at him. Couldn't. Instead, she focused on the papers in front of her, trying to keep her composure intact. "We both know what's at stake. I can't afford distractions." Jared's hand landed on the desk beside hers, his fingers brushing ever so slightly against hers. The contact was enough to send a surge of heat through her, but she fought to keep her reaction in check. "Is that what you think I'm offering you?" His voice dropped, a subtle challenge beneath the surface. "Distractions?" Emily swallowed, her throat dry. "I don't know what you want from me, Jared, but I can't lose focus now. Not when I'm this close." Jared studied her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable, and then, with a slight smirk, he stepped back. "I'll leave you to your work then. But just remember, Emily, there's more at play here than you think." He turned and walked out without another word, leaving her to process the weight of his presence, his words. Emily sat there, staring at the door long after it had closed behind him. She knew what he was doing. He was testing her, pushing her boundaries. And despite all her resolve, she couldn't help but wonder if this was more than just business. Jared Weller was a dangerous game. And for the first time, Emily wasn't sure if she was ready to play it, or if she already had. The evening was unusually quiet. The city of New York glittered like 1,000 diamonds outside the window of Emily's apartment, the streets humming with life beneath her. Yet inside, she sat alone, her thoughts whirling in a way they hadn't before. It had been 2 weeks since the successful product launch, 2 weeks since Jared had offered her the promotion, 2 weeks since everything in her life had shifted. She hadn't heard from him in days, and the space between them had grown strangely heavy. But that night, as Emily sifted through emails, a message from Jared appeared in her inbox. A dinner invitation. No business, just the two of them. A private dinner. For a moment, she hesitated. She hadn't seen him outside of work since their last conversation in her office. She had tried to convince herself that the professional boundaries between them were necessary. Jared was her boss, a billionaire who had invested in her career and her division. He had already given her the promotion she'd worked so hard for. What more could there be? But the truth was, despite her attempts to shut out her emotions, she couldn't stop thinking about him. His presence, the moments when their eyes locked, when his voice softened just for her. Jared had never shown any vulnerability to anyone. It was clear in the way he held himself, the way he exuded power in every room he entered. But with her, there had been flashes of something different, something human. With a sigh, she clicked open the message. "Dinner, 7:30. Just us. No work. No expectations. Jared." There it was. No fancy pleasantries, no elaborate invitation, just simple words that hinted at something more. Emily wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew she had to face whatever had been building between them. If anything, she owed it to herself to hear him out. The restaurant was tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, an upscale yet intimate place, far from the noise and clamor of the typical Manhattan hotspots. When Emily arrived, Jared was already seated at a corner table. He was dressed casually, but even then, he still exuded an effortless elegance. His sleeves rolled up, his jawline sharp as ever, his eyes watching her as she approached. "Emily," he greeted, standing to pull out her chair, a rare gesture that made her stomach tighten in a way she didn't expect. "You look stunning." "Thank you," she replied, her voice betraying the nervous tension she'd tried to suppress. She sat down, trying to ignore the thudding of her heart. "You look good, too." Jared smiled, but it wasn't his usual arrogant grin. This was softer, almost shy. "You didn't think I was going to let you work yourself to the bone for weeks without at least one evening to yourself, did you?" She gave him a small smile in return. "I guess I didn't expect this dinner to be on your terms." His smile faltered for a brief moment before he caught himself, his expression turning serious. "It's not a business dinner. This is me, offering you something real, no masks, no pretenses." Emily's eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Jared leaned back in his chair, his eyes not leaving hers. "I've been doing this for years, building a career, a business, a life. I thought I had it all figured out, that I didn't need anyone to complicate things. But then you came along, and you're different. You made me feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Something that isn't about power or business. Something personal." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but it wasn't this. She looked at him, watching the vulnerability in his gaze, the uncharacteristic openness. This wasn't the same Jared Weller who had challenged her to meet an impossible deadline. This was someone else entirely. He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "I've been trying to fight it, trying to push it away. But I can't. I'm not good at this vulnerability thing. Never have been. But Emily, I need you to know something." He paused, his eyes searching hers, as if he was weighing how much to reveal. "I care about you. And I'm not talking about business. I'm talking about us." Emily sat in stunned silence, her heart hammering against her chest. Jared Weller, the man who had built empires and crushed competitors, was telling her that he cared about her. The same man who had pushed her to her limits, who had made her feel both respected and threatened, now sat before her, stripped of his usual defenses. I don't know what to say," Emily finally managed, her voice shaky with emotion. "I don't know if I can believe this. You've made it clear that you don't let anyone get close." Jared exhaled deeply, leaning back in his chair, a slight grin tugging at his lips. "I don't. But you're different. I didn't expect that, but I can't deny it anymore. What we have is real. But I also know I've made things complicated. I've pushed you harder than anyone else, and if you're asking if I want to take that step, to be with you, then yes, Emily, I do." Her mind was a whirlwind, torn between the man who had been a powerful mentor and the man who had just laid his feelings bare before her. But she was scared. Scared of the consequences, scared of the risk of letting her guard down and taking the plunge with him. She took a deep breath, looking down at her hands before locking eyes with him. "And what if I take a risk on this? What happens next?" Jared's gaze softened, but there was still an edge to it, a sharpness that reminded her of the man he was. "I can't promise you everything, Emily, but I can promise you one thing. I won't stop fighting for this. Fighting for you." Later that night, after the dinner ended, Emily sat in her apartment staring at her phone. Jared's words had rattled her in a way she couldn't explain. She had spent so long building her career, fighting for every inch, and now the path ahead was uncertain. If she accepted his feelings, if she chose to take a risk on something personal, her career could suffer. But then again, what was the point of success if she couldn't experience life fully? Jared's proposition felt like a crossroads, one that would change everything. She texted Kate, her best friend, with trembling fingers. I need to make a decision. Can career and love coexist? I don't know if I can let this go. The reply came almost immediately. You'll figure it out. Just don't let fear hold you back. You deserve to be happy too. Emily put her phone down, her mind racing. She had always prided herself on her professional ambition, but now she was starting to question everything she thought she knew. Maybe it was time to take the leap, to trust that Jared wasn't just another billionaire playing a game. Maybe it was time to trust in herself, and in him. The next morning, Emily arrived at the office early, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her shoulders. She had the entire day ahead to make her choice, and for the first time in a long while, she felt both terrified and exhilarated by the possibilities. She knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened, her life was about to change forever. The office buzzed with the usual hum of productivity. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the occasional murmur of colleagues deep in discussion. But for Emily, it was as if the world had slowed down. As she sat at her desk, her eyes roamed the view outside, the vast expanse of the city that had always seemed so solid, so predictable. Yet, in the past few weeks, everything had shifted. She had made the decision. The leap. Her phone buzzed on her desk. It was a text from Jared. Can you meet me at the usual spot? 6:30. I think it's time we talked about the next steps. She smiled to herself, setting the phone down. The usual spot was the upscale restaurant where they had first discussed their future. Now, it felt less like a business meeting and more like the beginning of something personal, something real. After weeks of weighing her options, Emily had finally accepted the complexity of her feelings for Jared. She had decided that if she was going to take this leap, she would do it with her eyes wide open. Jared Weller, the billionaire CEO who had once seemed untouchable, now felt like an equal. Their professional relationship had started with challenge and rivalry, but it had evolved into something deeper. Through late nights, tense meetings, and moments of vulnerability, they had built something. They had worked through the tension, the uncertainties, the risk of mixing business with pleasure, and they had come out stronger on the other side. As she walked to the restaurant later that evening, Emily's heart raced. She had always been driven by ambition, by the desire to climb the corporate ladder and achieve more than she ever thought possible. But in these past few months, she had learned that ambition didn't have to come at the cost of everything else. Love, too, could be part of the equation, even if it was messy and complicated. When she arrived, Jared was already waiting at the table, his usual composed demeanor softened just a touch. He stood as she approached, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He was dressed casually tonight, a dark blazer over a simple black t-shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his forearms, a look that had always driven her crazy. "Emily," he said, his voice warm as he kissed her on the cheek in greeting. "You look beautiful as always." "Thanks," she said, her voice a little shakier than she'd like to admit. She sat down across from him, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another dinner. This was their future, sitting there in the quiet anticipation between them. "I've been thinking," Jared began, his tone serious but not heavy, "about everything that's happened in the past few weeks, about the choices we've both made." Emily nodded, her hands folded in her lap. "And what have you decided?" Jared's eyes locked onto hers, his gaze unwavering. "That we can't ignore what's been building between us. We've both had our share of challenges, but the truth is, I don't want to just let you go. I don't want to walk away from this." His voice softened. "I've spent too long running from things that matter, Emily. I'm not going to run from this." Her heart raced at his words, and she could feel a knot of emotion tighten in her chest. She had spent so long fighting against the idea of mixing love and work, But now, sitting here with Jared, she understood what he meant. There was no denying the connection between them, no pretending it was just business anymore. "I agree," Emily said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. "I think we've both been playing it safe for too long. I'm ready to take the risk. If we can balance everything, work, ambition, and us, I'm willing to give it a shot." Jared's smile widened, and for the first time in weeks, she saw something in him that wasn't about business or power. It was something more. "So, we're doing this," he said, leaning forward, his voice low. "Together?" "Together," she confirmed, her heart swelling with both excitement and fear. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. They talked about the future, about the challenges ahead, the inevitable hurdles they would face as a couple trying to navigate the complexities of their powerful careers and burgeoning relationship. They talked about work, of course, but more than that, they talked about dreams, about what they wanted, not just for themselves, but together. As they parted that night, Jared kissed her gently on the lips, his hand resting on the small of her back. "We've got a long road ahead of us," he murmured, "but I'm willing to take it with you." Emily smiled, her heart full. "I think we'll be just fine." In the weeks that followed, things were different, both in the office and in their personal lives. The dynamic between Emily and Jared shifted, evolving into something that wasn't defined by power or competition, but by mutual respect and a shared vision. They began working together more closely than ever before, their collaboration not just professional, but personal too. Jared's company continued to thrive, and Emily's role as VP solidified her place within the company. But more importantly, they learned to balance their ambitions with the life they were building together. Jared wasn't just her boss anymore. He was her partner, not only in business, but in life. Emily often thought back to that fateful moment when she had called Jared a handsome, egotistical man, and how, in that instant, everything had changed. What had seemed like an offhand comment, a moment of frustration, had turned into the catalyst for everything that followed. Her career had soared, yes, but so had her heart. And as she looked forward to the future, she realized that sometimes the most challenging and unexpected moments were the ones that defined who you become. As she sat at her desk one afternoon, reflecting on how far she had come, she smiled softly. She had built a life she was proud of, and more importantly, she had found someone to share it with. In the end, love and ambition had been far from mutually exclusive. She had learned that success wasn't just about climbing to the top. It was about having someone to stand beside you, no matter how high you reached. And as she looked across the room to where Jared stood, discussing strategy with a colleague, she realized that they had both found what they had been searching for all along. Together, they had built a future, not just as business partners, but as two people who had taken the leap and embraced the uncertain, beautiful adventure of love. The road ahead would not be easy, but as they faced it side by side, Emily knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going anywhere. Neither was Jared, and together they could conquer anything. Sometimes the most challenging and unexpected moments are the ones that define who we become. And sometimes the most arrogant man can teach you what it means to be truly fearless. If you enjoyed this story, hit the subscribe.